Okay, so in the first video, I showed you how to make a simple Hello World controller using the Bind-Rest framework. So now it's time to do something a little bit more useful and create a controller that accepts parameters from request. Let me show you how we're going to do this. So we're going to create a controller that responds to URL to display items in our store. For example, we're going to return, in this case, we're going to return a response of type JSON. So all we have to do, we can create a new class, new controller class, or we can just add another method to our existing controller. It's up to you. Sometimes it could be useful to group different controller methods in the same controller class. So the decision basically is up to you if you want to group it or if you want to create a new class. So here we're going to just create a new method. We can call it, for example, show store, like this. We're going to make this method async just because we need to return a promise. Now, if your method already returns a promise, for example, maybe you make some kind of a call to a database that already returns a promise, then you would not need this async method. So let's just start by returning a simple response, but this time we're going to use JSON response instead of just a plain text return. And Bind-Rest framework has a helper class for this, and it's called JSON response. JSON response, it must return some kind of you must pass some kind of a plain object, and it will be converted into JSON. First, let's import this class like this. Now you can see we imported it here, JSON response. And so we're going to pretend that this is some kind of an API for the store. And we're going to return something like a category. So maybe you sell in your store, maybe you have different categories, like maybe you sell in clothes and shoes. So let's just display a category for now. So how are we going to get this value of a category? So the purpose of this video is to demonstrate how to extract request parameters from request. So we start by just using a normal parameter category like this. And so we're just basically going to return the JSON that shows us the same parameters that are being passed to us. So we want category, and let's say we want the maximum highest price. So we want to create items that cost no more than this max price. So we're going to call it max price like this. And let's say we also want to get the value of user's browser, user agent. So we're going to add another parameter called maybe user agent. So we want to know what browser the user was using. So let's start with this, and now we have to add a URI that it will be listening to. The same thing, we're going to listen to GET requests only, and we can call it, we're going to call it, the URI will start with store. And now let's discuss how we can possibly pass these values: category, max price, and user agent. Bind-Rest framework has a number of decorators that tell the framework where to get this parameter values. For example, in case of a max price, we can pass it as a query string parameter. User agent is basically a header name, user agent. And the category, we can pass it in a URI itself as a path parameter. So let's start with the path parameter. The way we do it, we're going to add another section to our URI, another slash, and open close curly braces, and we're going to put category like this. So now all we have to do is add a decorator here, add path param, import it. See, it's imported path param, and that's it. So now whenever request comes in and it starts with a store, the framework will extract the next section of the URL, and it's going to assign it to a parameter called category, because we call it category right here. So the path param name is the same name as our parameter here. Now we can actually use different name here in our method, different than it's declared here, and I'm going to show you in the example of max price. So max price, we wanted to pass as a query parameter. Now we can also pass it as a path parameter, but for the purpose of this demonstration, I want to show you like different ways to extract parameters. So query parameter is very similar. The decorator is different. It's called query param. Okay, import it. Now we have a query param max price, and a user agent, since it comes as a header parameter, now there's going to be a header param. Now header param is actually a little bit different because it needs the name of the header. So if I don't indicate, and the way I indicate the name of the header, I open it and close this parenthesis, and I put the name of the header that I'm interested in. In this case, it's a standard header, user.agent -agent. So now the framework will extract this header from request and assign it to our user agent. And so with this is all done, what's left for us to do is just try to run this. So let's reload. Go to the browser. Okay, so, and let's see. I did run it before, and so we're my controller was not yet defined, so I got this message not found. Now we defined a controller, so now we have the store and shoes. And now, as you can see, if I reload it, we get a response, category shoes, like this. And by the way, because I added the slash, it's being added here, so I don't really want this slash. And now we got this category shoes, and I got user agent, which is basically my browser. Okay, so we also, in this response, we also indicated that we wanted to see the max price, but you see, it's not here. It's because I did not pass any max price. So what I'm doing, I'm just going to add the query parameter, max price, and let's say I want it to be something like $24.99 as the highest price of item that I want to show. If I reload, I see my max price right here. Now, basically this is how easy it is to extract parameters from requests, just using simple decorators. And notice how in header param, I actually indicate the name of the header, but here in a query param, I don't indicate the name of query param because the query parameter name is the same as our parameter name here. But I can, if I want to, extract the query parameter by different name. What if I don't want to put max price in our URL? What if I just want to put some kind of a shorter name, for example, like maybe letter M for max price? All I have to do then is to indicate I want to extract query parameter with a specific name, M. So as you can see how flexible this is. So if your parameter here is the same as your query parameter, then you don't need to do this. But if you want the different names of actual query parameter and our method argument here, then you can indicate different names. So we put letter M here. So now let's reload. And now if I reload, I don't see the max price because now it's looking for just one character, M. All I do is M, and now I got the max price back. So the same thing we can do with this path param. If it doesn't match what we have here, we can put it into a parenthesis. Okay, so this brings us to another point. If I don't put this query parameter, right, it just not being added to JSON because the value is actually undefined, and when JSON serializes something, it excludes undefined values from JSON. But the problem is I actually want to require this max price to be passed. I don't want the consumer of our API to just leave this off. And I want to show some kind of error if they did not pass max price, because maybe without this parameter we cannot properly display our page or calculate some sales, and so I would rather return the error right away rather than just try to return our normal response. So how do I require that max price being passed? Well, first of all, there are actually two ways. Since it's a TypeScript and the TypeScript allows default values, usually default values have to go at the end of our parameters. So all I can do is just move this parameter to the end, just cut and then paste to the end here. Now what I can do is add a default value. Let's say 10, right? So if I reload now max price, even though I didn't pass anything, I get a default value. Very easy. If I do pass, let's say 21.99, now I got my new value, 21.99. Now this was one way to deal with parameters that may or may not be passed by the user. Just have some kind of a sensible default right here. But what if you, instead of using some default values, what if you just really want people to pass the number? Well, that's simple. Remove the default value and another decorator, add required. So now we have to import this. It's imported required. So now the framework knows that this parameter is required, and if it's not passed, it will immediately generate error. So basically this method will not even run, because you can have a method that does some calculation, called database, doing some kind of expensive calculation and processing. If required parameter is not passed, it's not even going to get to this method. The framework will return the error right away. So let's see, reload this. Now let's not pass the value, and now you see the error right here. And the error is actually pretty helpful, because it tells you, first of all, it tells you where it failed. Notice how it gives you controller name, and the name of controller is our controller class dot controller method. So right away you can go to your code and find your controller right here. All you have to do, open your class, hello world, and this is controller method, show store, and you know the error is somewhere here. It goes further and tells you what happened. Required parameter not passed from request. So the parameter type, supposedly it was expecting query param, and the parameter name, it was expecting M, and it even gives you a position. Position is parameter position here. This is the first one, second one, and the third one. So it will help you to debug your code. You see the error like this, immediately you go to your controller method, and then you see your third parameter wasn't passed, max price. So now if we pass it again, oh, I used the uppercase, so I still got this error, so it has to be lowercase. Now I got it. Now this is great, right? So now let's talk about parameter types. Now, as you might have guessed, like normally this path param would be a string, header param is also a string, and query param, usually it's a string, right? It could be an array actually. And how do you make it into an array is like this. You can pass multiple values, which is actually pretty standard. I mean, it's not commonly used, but you can pass this parameter more than once. Now, in case of a maximum price, it doesn't make sense, but what if it was something like a color? Maybe you wanted to show the shoes in black or red colors so that you can pass your parameter more than once. So let's see. 23, 99, and I don't know, 50. See, now it's an array of these two values. So let's remove this. So speaking of parameter type, as you can see here, it passes the value as a string. But when we're actually doing some calculation, we may expect it to be a number, because we will compare something like less than, greater than. Also, it doesn't have to be a price. Maybe it is some kind of an ID that you store in a database, and it has to be a number. And if you pass the same number as a string, your query in a database will fail. So we can actually convert it into a number very easily. This is a TypeScript, so all we have to do is add a type here, number. Now this framework supports string or number or boolean or an array of something, some values, as a type of parameter. So now I changed this max price into a number. So whenever request comes in, the framework will know that we want this parameter to be a number, and it will attempt to convert it into a number. And I said attempt is because it may fail, because some strings cannot be converted into a number. And if it fails, it will generate an error right away, because we want a number, and if we couldn't get a number, we'll get an error. So let's see how this works. Reload. Okay, did I reload here? Let's reload this. Reload. Let's do some different number. Now, you see what happened here? There are no double quotes around this, because the type also changed now into a number. And so this is exactly what we wanted. So what if we pass some value that cannot be converted into a number? Maybe we put some kind of a string like x large. Right away we got an error. Again, we have a controller name, method name, and request parameter of type string cannot be converted to number. And again, we have a type of request param. This is query param with this parameter name and the position. So again, we can go back to our code and easily find where and what went wrong. So, and you see how easy it was. All we had to do is add type, and the framework took care of converting it to number, so we don't have to convert anything here in our code. It took care of making sure it can be converted. There is another type, for example, boolean. If we indicate the type boolean, then it can accept strings of values 1 or 0. 1 would convert to boolean true, 0 will convert to boolean false, or we can also use the actual words true or false. So let's reload and see how it works. Again, we have this x large. If we reload, so now it says it cannot be converted to boolean. But if we put true, everything is fine. So now we have true, or, and by the way, the case here is not important, so we can say true like this with the uppercase, or like this, and it still converts to true. And if we put 0, it's false. If we put any other number like 2, it's not gonna work. So only 1 or 0 are allowed when you expect a Boolean value, or the actual words true or false. And again, the framework took care of this conversion for us and made sure it can be converted. So let's see what does the framework actually know what the return value of the method is. If we hover over here, you can see that the return value is here, promise of JSON response. But then it goes actually further than that. It's not going to only say it's a JSON response, but it actually gives us a type of JSON response. It knows that max price is going to be Boolean, and here the category is actually, it says any type, which is, we can fix it, and we should always use types. That's, of course, so the TypeScript can help us. It's make the TypeScript work for you. And now that we have quite a few parameters and the line gets longer, we should just put parameters on owned lines like this. And user agent is also going to be a string. Okay. So again, the framework knows what is the type of a JSON being returned. So how is this helpful? Well, it's helpful because we can actually enforce the type. We can create an interface somewhere, and we can tell the framework that it's not just a JSON response, because you see this JSON response, you can actually here indicate the type, and the framework will actually enforce it whenever it can. And this can work for you, and it can eliminate a whole class of errors at runtime. If TypeScript can determine that you're returning a different type, different from what you said you're going to return. So how we do it, we create like interface. This is just an example. Interface, you know, my response, and then we return in category of type string. We return in user agent string, and we return in max price, and usually it's a number. This is what we want to return, right? So copy it here, and see here we actually return, we have max price as a Boolean, but the interface said it has to be a number. So let's see what happens. All we have to do, put the type here, and right away you see this squiggly line, hover over it and say Boolean is not assignable to a number, because we just saved ourselves a lot of issues in production, because before we even deploy this, it fails to compile. And this is very helpful. This is one of the benefits of this framework. All we have to do is correct this type here. Say this is a number. And you see what happened is, now everything is fine. And because we said it's a number, the framework will also enforce, like I showed you before, that the passed parameter is a number, that it can be converted into a number. So quickly, we learned about the ways to extract various parameters from request using decorators, path param, query param, header param. By the way, you can if you want to, get the entire headers object if you want. Now, how does that work? Simple. A decorator, headers, add headers. So now import this. Now the entire headers object will be passed here. Let's try and see what happens. Headers, again, you see here headers, it's not part of our interface. All we have to do, add the headers. And we can put a type any for now. Okay. So now let's reload this. And as you can see, the entire headers object now is available to us, so we can extract headers ourselves if we want to. But usually you don't need the entire headers object, and usually you need just one or two or more headers. It's much better to use a header param. So the framework will do the extraction for you, and one of the benefits for it, of course, is because you can add a required decorator, and then if the header that you expected is not available in request, it will then generate an error. So there are other decorators, for example, and there are many of them, and we covered some of the most common ones here, including headers. There is also just for example, there is also a request. So this will pass the entire request object from Node. You know how Node.js has request and response object. So this is actual Node.js request object that came into our framework. And the same way you can have a response object. So in the next video, we're going to cover some more advanced features like param validation.